of City Council and Planning Commission at 5:34, Monday, January 23rd. City Clerk, roll call, please.
Okay, this is the joint study session between the City Council and the Planning Commission. Start the roll call vote with Councilmember Bowles.
Here.
Councilmember Beer.
Here.
Councilmember Beckmeyer.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Vaterlas.
Here.
Mayor Big Stick.
Present.
And Planning Commissioner Wright.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Godwin.
Present.
Planning Vice Chair Hauser.
Here.
Planning Chair Berman.
Present.
And I'll note that Commissioner Ferguson is absent and Commissioner Leal is absent.
Staff report.
Thank you, Mayor Big Stick and Mayor Pro Tem and City Council members and Planning Commissioners. It's great to be here with this joint study session on this very important study. I'm Kevin Woodhouse, the City Manager, and I know I'm going to go through an initial part of this presentation rather quickly because we do want to get to the real substance of the economic opportunities study. So by way of introduction, the Economic Opportunities Study is a critical component to the Vision 2025 and Beyond Fiscal Sustainability Study that the city has been undertaking for a while. And the study began last year, and we're culminating now with this study session to receive input from planning commissioners and the City Council. The City Council is not approving the study tonight. We're really seeking all of the members' input on sort of this draft of the recommendations in the study. It includes a lot of data, a lot of slides we'll try to get through. The Cosmont and Company is here. They're the consultant that was hired to conduct this study. We'll move through, allow about a half hour for that presentation. The study includes a list of opportunities sites in town and opportunity actions the city could take and factor into our economic development strategies. And so we look forward to questions and comments and input as well as public input. What we'll plan to do is make revisions to the study and bring that back in the future for council adoption. So again, I mentioned the Vision 2025 and Beyond financial sustainability study and the various components. As the council recalls, there was financial forecasting, robust public engagement, discussion about revenue enhancement strategies. That sort of led to the half-cent transactions and use tax measure that was adopted in November. And again, this is about item 4, the economic development strategies. And the final piece to the sustainability study is really piecing together all of the story, the vision about economic sustainability in the city. I won't take the time to go through this detailed timeline, but as you can see, it dates back to spring of 2019 that we've been pursuing this vision for the 2025 and beyond study and bringing us to this point tonight. Again, for the economic opportunity study specifically, the purpose is to really look through a microscope at 5 different business zones in the city and analyze those opportunities that exist in those business zones. There was robust public engagement, including a council ad hoc subcommittee that helped identify key community and business stakeholders for interviews as part of this, and Cosmont will discuss that. There was a community meeting, the first one of which was virtual via Zoom, and then the second one of which was in person at the community center. The first one occurred at the beginning of the study to get input. The second one occurred after the draft analysis had been completed by Cosmont to discuss some of those outcomes and get input again. And again, in looking at economic opportunities, exploring local conditions and market economics, Cosmont will delve into those details. list of opportunities to be reviewed by the council and the Planning Commission to get input tonight, and direction on next steps to help inform our long-term economic development strategy in Pacifica. And with that, I will turn it over to Ken Hira, President of Cosmont Companies.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, members of the City Council, members of the Planning Commission, my name is Ken Hira with Cosmont Companies. It's good to be back. We've been up a couple times in an effort to prepare this economic opportunity study. And there's a lot of information, of course. There's a full report, which you all have received. There's a summary presentation of PowerPoint slides that I'll go through, and there was also a written executive summary. And so I'll try to get through this in an efficient way, but I know there can be questions, and I'm certainly, we're here tonight to go through get through the feedback and questions and answers. So I'll start here, big picture. As Kevin mentioned, there were 5 business districts that were identified. So we focused on those 5. And again, the notion was if we can identify opportunity sites in a way for there to be fiscal viability or sustainability or improved economic benefit, that was really the objective of our study. It was to look for long-term commercial opportunities supported by market forces and enhanced by steps that the city and the community can take. Of course, environmental studies would need to be performed as appropriate in California pursuant to the CEQA process for any of these sites to ultimately get implemented. In one sense, while we've done a lot of homework and a lot of data collection and provided some recommendations, you know, it's as if you're at the front end of these opportunity sites, and you're going to be your decision to then further pursue either due diligence, additional information, environmental research, and or public-private, transactions or partnerships, if you will. So we're really trying to assist the city with economic objectives, and we've done a lot of market analysis, as I said, provided some recommendations. Cosmont Companies has been in the business for 36 years. We've done lots of work for lots of cities, lots of economic studies, and interestingly enough, while there are similarities, each one of them are different. So this is a pretty unique community. I'll go through our approach. We've reviewed a variety of documents, budgets, planning documents, taken tours of your community a couple times, interviews with city staff, council members, and community stakeholders. Stakeholders you might consider folks that have economic interest, businesses, property owners, frankly, council members and planning commissioners are stakeholders. And then, of course, there's the community at large as well. And we've done outreach to all of those parties. Assessment of regional economic trends, local demographic and market conditions, both in-person and virtual. Community outreach to gain insights. A detailed assessment of the districts, and then a focus on the identification of opportunity sites. So unique coastal city here in Pacifica with a variety of attractions. The commercial base is weighted on community-oriented centers, neighborhood centers, and you'll see that in the data. With a limited number of hotel rooms, you've got restaurants. There's no real regional retail anchor tenants per se, partly as a function of the broad geographics of the city. There's a high level of traffic along Highway 1 or Coast Highway, 10,700 cars passing southbound, and there's some special events that you all have that you all know about. Needless to say, Fog Fest is one of your primary ones with as many as 60,000 visitors. So historically, there have been budget challenges for the city and key projects that haven't really come to fruition in terms of new development. And so that's, again, 67% of your tax revenues come from property tax, 10% come from sales tax, and 7% from hotel transient occupancy tax. A benchmark is that 10% of sales tax is a little low compared to other cities when you average them out in California. The newly approved Measure Y is adding sales tax at about $2.6 million annually to help address these structural deficits, but there needs to be additional strategies in our estimation. for more sustainable and additionally sustainable tax revenues. Property tax is a major category, as we talked about. Although what's interesting to us is Half Moon Bay and San Mateo County had much sharper declines as a result of COVID. And you'll see some of the statistics for different opportunity sites and different parts of your districts that really reflect some level of stability during the pandemic. And so you'll see kind of a pre and post pandemic set of activities. Internet sales have grown tremendously, which much of that goes into a county pool, which has benefited the city of Pacifica. On-site sales have had very little growth. Restaurants are a large category, food and drug and gasoline. And of course, the city owns the Beach Boulevard site, which is essentially where we're at. That really is an opportunity for development in our estimation that probably can be hospitality, visitor serving. The notion of selling property is an option of yours. You don't have to sell it. You could ground lease it and really retain ownership of it if it is your desire as an opportunity site to pursue development on it. But it's one of the key sites that we see in that fashion. The market is pretty stable over 10 years. Retail captures about a third of what's considered the local peninsula coastline submarket. Office has grown very, very little, if not shrunk. And office inventory is changing dramatically, not the least of which is catalyzed by the pandemic and really a hybrid workforce and a change in working environments. Multifamily residential is a very strong supply-constrained asset class or land use, and it is experiencing some volatility. Downtown San Francisco has really seen a bit of an exodus of folks kind of seeking more suburban environments, which can inure to the benefit of your community. And the hotel market is really kind of rebounding post-pandemic, particularly in the leisure category, and your opportunity for leisure attraction should be considered pretty strong. So this is an illustrative fiscal impact. It's a little bit tricky because we try to use our best estimates when we come to these things, and many of the numbers that we've prepared are trying to give order of magnitude, but I'll walk through this and certainly can take questions. We just looked at different densities and land uses on a 1 acre hypothetical site. You could put 10,000 square feet of commercial services. It would generate a certain amount of tax revenues for you, and then some direct sales or use tax. And we estimated that to be $35,000. You could do 10,000 square feet of retail, that 35 would probably grow to 60,000. 10,000 square foot restaurant, which would generate more sales tax than just traditional retail, in our estimation, at 90,000. Again, on a relative scale, we wanted to show illustratively order of magnitude. 50-unit multifamily housing is going to generate a certain tax base. It also is going to have residents that spend money. So we account for the sales tax as a function of having more residential. It's about 85,000. Mixed use with 40 units of residential and only 5,000 square foot of commercial could garner $95,000 of annual general fund revenues. And lastly, a 60-room upscale hotel, has a certain tax base, but the reality of it is it's the transient occupancy tax, which is one of the greatest generators of revenue that can be direct to a city and direct to the city of Pacifica. And at $385,000, it's clearly the largest by threefold plus. In our outreach and survey, we conducted virtual community workshops, as we mentioned, did a couple of those. We had 167 respondents to an online survey. Stakeholder outreach, where we had virtual and in-person meetings. Community meeting, where we had a workshop at the community center. And we did roundtables, and we were trying to get input from as many folks as we could. The online survey, I'll just go through some of the results. 85% of residents want to see more dining. 70% want to see more gathering places. 65% more entertainment, 60% more art and cultural, and 50% more housing options. So there's some quotes. Focus on smart growth, improving the quality of life, more outdoor dining, walkable, small coastal town feel. and improving safety, beautification, to just name a few. A lot on this page, but these are the graphical results of the survey. And, again, I sort of summarize what seemed to be important to what types of new additional businesses and developments would you like to see in the business districts, restaurants, leisure, shopping, places to go, art, and then housing options sort of in the middle of that pack. Which improvements or amenities would you like to see in the districts? In that survey, the results were mobility, walkability, safety, traffic, public art, signage, and wayfinding seemed to be something that was a big theme as well that I recall clearly in our interviews. So this is a little bit of a big picture discussion about where things are with retail, office, industrial, residential, hospitality. I think we all know, because we kind of live it in our daily lives, that retail has changed so dramatically. And essentials or, necessity retail is doing strong. Is doing strong. It did strong through the pandemic. It's a driver of essential trips and essential needs. People want entertainment. People want experience. But let's be real that we're buying a lot more commodities online. And so there's an evolution of retail that's really changing. As I said earlier, your community has a lot of neighborhood centers, which serves you well in terms of, storefront tax revenue to the extent that you have grocery stores and other retail and some restaurants. Office is changing as well, with a major shift to suburban and a major shift to hybrid working. Industrial is, industrial kind of is taking on even different forms with e-commerce, with last mile delivery, with fulfillment. So there's a strong demand for that asset class. Residential is not just where we live, but it's also where we play and work, so to speak, because we're working a lot more from home. New residential sites are showing up in shopping centers all over the state, all over the country for that matter. And then hospitality, like I say, is rebounding in the leisure category. Here's some other themes, and just so you know, we are sharing information like this with many, if not all, of our cities and clients. Housing is not a loss leader. We're not finding that it's a definitive conclusion that housing ends in a fiscal negative impact per se, because of the value of the construction. It depends on your tax share, et cetera. Retail is not just retail anymore, as retail is blending with other uses like residential. Teleworking is reconfiguring the office market. And again, industrial is really can be critical to your economy given the doorstep and curbside delivery patterns that we've come to know. So Pacifica is home to a variety of historic and cultural attractions, home to restaurants, local flavor, a lot of potential for walkable communities, and continued experiential and entertainment type uses. Has many strengths, so we did a SWOT analysis, some strengths, weaknesses, and challenges. I'll go through these quickly. Sharp Park specific plan, which lays the groundwork for entitlements or different activities within that geography, and it certainly can help the private sector understand how they can make an investment and what the process is. San Francisco Half Moon Bay adjacency, beautiful hiking and coastal access, Sharp Park Golf Course, the Pier, Fog Fest, and some of the other historic attractions like the Sanchez Museum, Sam's Castle, also Sanchez Art Center. Some weaknesses and challenges, a lot of traffic on Coast Highway, infrastructure deficiencies, commercial signage doesn't seem to have sort of a theme that either embraces or acknowledges that you're coming into the city, particularly with some dramatic entrances into your city, and also some wayfinding, which can make a difference for the businesses in the business districts. Small town feel, trade area population is pretty spread out, and it's just not as dense for some other major retailers. Transit's a little bit of a challenge in the permitting process. That's where the private sector says, can I get to the finish line with a project which would allow for you all to gain tax revenues, opportunities, capture some of the 10,000 folks that are traveling along Coast Highway, More events on Palmetto Avenue. You'll see later on that could be really embraced as a downtown. Fireworks. Much of this also comes from community input and stakeholders. So we want it to be good listeners. Utilize Business Matters newsletter to help promote, install EV charging facilities in some of the shopping districts, social events. Sharp Park Golf Course can be promoted and to a greater degree. The Quarry property is another key economic development opportunity site, potentially. Chamber could provide hotels with some of your monthly magazines. And then, of course, your marina requirements at 1,900 housing units really can translate into millions of dollars of assessed value and potential spending. So getting into the districts a little bit, we went through each one as mentioned. We tried to really use technologies. We're using it in our work across the state. Technologies including Placer AI, which I'll talk a little bit more about, Esri, CoStar, Implan when it comes to fiscal analyses. So the graphs here are based on foot traffic. And foot traffic can tell us a lot about the success of various shopping centers. So, and then I'll show you a different map that actually identifies where people are coming from. This is all based on, for the most part, Placer AI, which is an artificial intelligence platform that tracks the movement of people through their cell phones or smartphone devices. So what's interesting to us is at least two things. One is what happened during the pandemic. So if you look at the red line, this is the Fairmont Shopping Center. You know, much of the activity declined, which is pretty obvious. And then the question is, where are you today relative to that traffic activity as a pre-COVID baseline? And you can see that in the case of Fairmont, it's sort of back to a baseline. The other part that is interesting for us is the orange color tells us where people are coming from to go to that center. Well, it makes a lot of sense that the Fairmont Shopping Center draws from outside the boundary, if you will, because it's sort of on the northern eastern location of your city boundaries, which is the black dotted line, and you can see that folks are coming to that center from necessarily outside the city limits. When you keep going through this, here's the Pacific Manor Shopping Center. It really didn't have as dramatic of a decline during COVID, and frankly, it's come back even stronger than before. And where are folks coming from? They're coming, a lot more of them are coming from within your city limits and outside your city limits to the north. So here's some comments about the Pacific Manor Fairmount area. It's a gateway from the north, challenges with respect to signage, large concentration of retail and residential. There's not undeveloped sites within it. Substantial refurbishment of the Pacific Manor Shopping Center we think is needed. On Fairmont, strong grocer, pretty solid activity. So there's not a whole lot there to change. Sharp Park and Eureka Square. Again, look at the visits, really dramatic changes below the baseline. And then you can tell that a high concentration of folks within your city limits frequent the Eureka Shopping Center. It's a very local draw. Sharp Park is home to City Hall, Pacifica Pier, main library, adjacent to the county, owned Sharp Park Golf Course, suited for future downtown uses. Of course, you have the city-owned Beach Boulevard site. You've got Eureka Square. As far as Rockaway goes, it was hit harder as a result of the pandemic, and you'll see partly the reason why is because its draw is so regional. If you look at the orange dots and you realize there's folks coming to Rockaway from the East Bay. So it's a significant draw from outside the city limits per se, which is good news, bad news in that during the pandemic it really declined, but now it's coming back as people are getting out again. Rockaway Beach is a main tourism center. It has your majority of your hotel rooms, limited parking, which is a challenge, and then the Quarry site, in our estimation, of course, is a good development opportunity with the right uses. Lindemar, institutionally owned, or at least that shopping center is, and you can see its activity during COVID and after COVID, and its draw. So what makes sense for Lindemar, of course, is it's going to draw a lot more from the south, from the Half Moon Bay area. So that stands to reason. And it's really the gateway from the south. It's got the largest concentration of retail and residential. There are several opportunity sites, which I'll get into in a second, more specifically. Pedro Point, you can see it really was the district that wasn't affected, if you will. It was, but it really didn't dip so much as a result of the pandemic. And to a degree, you've got a smaller shopping center there, but it is a real destination. And you can see that there's a decent regional draw to Pedro Point, but you have a high concentration also of folks within your city boundaries. So access is a little bit of a challenge. It's got a new fitness center and a grocery outlet, and there's a vacant 5-acre parcel behind it that, has coastal commission requirements that'll make that more complicated, I think, for development per se. So opportunity sites, there's 8. And I can go through these pretty quickly, but we identified the parcel, some thoughts on what could take place. I mean, this is your Beach Boulevard site, and certainly hotel or visitor serving uses could be a big draw. 3.5 acres. I think next steps, we've done next steps and we've done economic benefits. And again, I can answer questions to those, but it's determined, the desirability for hospitality there. If there is that direction to move forward, the Surplus Land Act will need to be taken into consideration because it's owned by the city. And I can talk a long time about Surplus Land Act because we're in the middle of that. That's caused a lot of changes on how cities can conduct activities on city-owned land. And then that process would need to be undertaken, and if an affordable housing developer didn't have interest, you could go to the private sector, if you will, and pursue a hospitality or a mix or blend of uses on that site. And then we've tried to project out, there's probably up to $650,000 of potential tax revenue economic benefit. And the estimates here are high level, order of magnitude, but it's trying to just show that if you do a hotel, as you saw earlier, the transient occupancy tax can be significant to the city. Various sites in Palmetto Avenue, which is, again, an effort to try to create more of a downtown. These can be low-density multifamily residential or retail. You could discuss the specific merits of the specific plan with some property owners and consider some additional parking in the area. Our estimation at a high level, if you did 30 to 40 units of residential and probably a small amount of retail necessarily, it could generate $100,000 in economic benefit. The quarry property, we believe it's the eastern parcel and the southern end of that, which is about 20 acres, that has the opportunity. A next step would be, should you consider it a developable opportunity, which would require likely a specific plan process, and that's working with the owner and really understanding the ultimate use that could make sense for the city. But our estimation is if you did a kind of a low-density, sprawling, high-class hotel project there, plus some residential to really make feasibility of the site work, it could generate, $700 to over $1 million of tax revenue for the city. The Seabowl parking lot, in our just visually, it seems like it's underutilized in terms of there could be opportunity there to build, whether it's residential or more retail. And in doing so, our high-level estimation with residential could yield an additional $200,000 in annual tax revenue. The parking lot behind the Lindemar Shopping Center, Park Mall opportunity sites. There's a Sam Trans Park and Ride, which is in a very high-value location, and the community center, which is really also in a very high-value location. You've got Caltrans that owns the parking lot, But to the extent that that wants to be recreational or entertainment, can it include some commercial amount of commercial uses that can take advantage of its location? That was our thought. And then I've got some overall statistics here that you all, I'm sure, know, but 38,000 population, average household income in your city of 182,000. Jobs do leave the city. And then, again, 2/3 of revenue are from property taxes. About 20% are from sales and cannabis, 10% from just sales, and the balance is from hotel and franchise taxes. Sales taxes have grown, but as I said, a lot of that is also becoming more attributable to the county pool. And property tax revenues have grown as well. Assessed value growth is driven really by high real estate values and mark-to-market reassessments for long-term properties. So I think on that note, hopefully I didn't go too slow or fast, but I'm available for questions. Thank you.
We're going to go to the attachments.
Yeah, I think we're going to transition to Brian Mora from RGS to finish up a last few slides. I did want to take the opportunity while we're bringing that up to say something that I didn't say in my introductory comments, is that when council and the commission members get into discussion, this is not a discussion about details of what commissioners or council members think about specific opportunity sites. So we have some really big opportunity sites that are mentioned in this report. This report is the financial lens into, what different scenarios on those sites could bring. So the questions and the discussion maybe should angle more at, questioning about that financial analysis related to sites. But again, it's not what folks council members, commissioners would like to see at the quarry site or at 2212, et cetera. And I think Assistant City Attorney Bizzano would probably want to add some comments about the importance of actually not talking about that. So keep that in mind. I wanted to mention that up front, that again, this is a detailed economic dive into those, so that in the future, when opportunity sites are coming up for discussion or analysis, we have this study and this data to resort to point to in the analysis, just as we would environmental data, other community aspects, public input, et cetera. So, caveat for the discussion.
Okay, I just wanted to touch briefly upon some of the attachments and the next steps for this meeting. First of all, in the attachments, you'll see that we have several attachments in your packet. The first one, attachment 3, is sort of a master list of 30 opportunities that are available that are outlined in the study. And what we've done is we've color-coded these so you can see that, for example, the yellow ones are the citywide opportunities, the ones in orange or in Lindemar, the ones in green are in Pacific Manor, the next color down is Rockaway, and then finally Sharp Park. So the idea there is to not only summarize for you all of the opportunities, but also to look at it on a business district by business district basis. And I can also say that having been at the second community workshop, that was one of the comments that we heard from the public pretty loudly, that they appreciated the fact that the study was looking at each part of the community separately as opposed to looking at it all at once. And then the next slide, attachment 4, is a table that summarizes, as the city manager indicated, the revenue opportunities of the 8 opportunity sites, and they're shown as a range. Again, as has been mentioned earlier, that this is a very high-level look at all of these. Obviously, a lot will have to do with down the road which opportunity sites the council has an interest in pursuing, and then ultimately what types of uses land there. And then when you get to that place, you'll have a better idea of exactly what kind of revenue generation is possible. And then finally, on the third slide, on attachment 5, we've given you something called opportunity timing, which is the first attempt by the staff to look at all of these 30 opportunities, and then to try to put some sort of a timeline on them, recognizing that with 30 different opportunities, it's going to take a while over a multi-year period to actually explore all of these, analyze them, and potentially move some of them forward. And as you can see by looking at the list in the first bucket, the short term, a lot of these are marketing oriented or things like business matters that the city already has underway. And then as you get into the medium term, these are some opportunities that could be executed relatively short term. And then finally, in the longer term is where we've placed the various opportunity sites for the most part, recognizing that that's going to take a lot of work and heavy lifting. And then in terms of next steps in the process and kind of what happens tonight, our vision is that, first of all, we will have questions from the Council and Planning Commission for Mr. Hira and for staff, followed by public comment, and then some discussion by the Council and the Planning Commission in terms of your thoughts about the study and the materials that you've been presented. And what we're looking for tonight is some initial feedback for the staff in terms of both the study, the opportunities, and the timing, recognizing that the Council and the Commission may decide that there are some additional items perhaps that should be in the city's economic priorities that may not have been identified in the study. And also there may be some thoughts about moving some of the items around in terms of the timing. And then after we get that sort of feedback tonight, the vision is that there would be a further consideration of the study and, more importantly, perhaps the city's initial economic development priorities sometime early in 2023. It would come back to the Council with a document that would have some initial thoughts, again, probably focusing on those short-term items as adjusted by the comments we hear from you tonight. So with that, I'll turn it back to the Mayor and we'll get rolling.
Thank you very much. We're about to have questions from Council and Planning Commission. Before we do, I just want to remind members of the public there are yellow cards in the back of the room. If anyone is going to want to speak on this, be so kind as to fill out a card and bring it up, and we'll call on you during communications. So Council, Planning Commission, does anybody have questions for staff? I appreciate, while we usually use our button system to indicate that you want to speak, we also have members from Planning Commission that do not have access to those buttons. So for the sake of this conversation, feel free to raise hands. Be happy to call on you. Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, I noticed you guys didn't discuss short-term rentals. That's been a rapidly increasing use of residential property in the city and is of some concern to a number of the residents. I think that affects the viability of hotels. I'd like to see a discussion in the next version of this, or the final version of it, of what would be a good short-term rental approach that would preserve the viability of hotels while being legal with the Coastal Commission. And my other point was, in the discussion of development of the general plan, some of the sites that you've identified were also identified as part of our almost 1,900 housing units we'd have to build. So we need to make some pretty clear decisions of why each site is a better choice for housing or a better choice as an economic opportunity site. And if you could summarize that in some sort of document, that would be quite helpful to me.
Thank you, Commissioner Godwin. As we go through, we'll have time for deliberation after public comment and questions. So for the moment for this segment, if anyone has specific questions for staff, that we can engage some staff dialogue by asking questions. Commissioner Hauser. Vice Chair Hauser, excuse me.
Thank you, Mayor. I had a couple of different questions. One of them is on the attachment 3 relating to the Beach Boulevard site. I see that that's listed as a medium-term opportunity, but you were very apt to point out that that has to go through SLA. And I just wanted to understand if that medium-term opportunity still made sense with SLA.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think perhaps without SLA, it's really a short-term opportunity in so much as I think it's a site that could be pretty viable, now. There's not a reason to wait per se in terms of at least trying to pursue an understanding of hotel interest.
Sure.
So therefore, without getting into the details of SLA, I think we tend to kind of look at that as about a 6-month process.
Okay.
So I think that kind of adds to the timeline, which probably pushes it into medium. You could argue it's a short to medium term opportunity.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. When you were looking at the 50-unit multi-home project as an $85,000 per year tax generator, I was wondering if that is an annual recurring generation or if you're including development impact fees amortized over some amount of time, because I couldn't quite follow the math to get to 80, unless the homes were like $2 million. I just couldn't quite get there.
Well, to answer the question in short, it is an annual tax revenue generation. It's actually kind of a static tax generation for a year, if you will, but it is meant to be annual. And then that wouldn't have taken into consideration the fact that it could grow. Property taxes are going to grow at 2%. Sales tax could grow at something else. TOT could grow at yet another rate. So there's a future growth to those numbers. And they were trying to, again, identify a relative scale of tax generation that, yes, is annual.
Okay, so just trying to follow the logic for one second. If we have like a 1.25% tax rate, and then I think how much is it 6% that gets passed back through to the city from the county,
right?
Approximately.
Well, yeah. There's also the addition of VLF, which is the vehicle
licensing fee. Yes.
Yeah, which adds to that. And then there's also the other fees that tend to get generated as a result of if there are any franchise fees or business license fees. And then, of course, there's also potentially sales or TOT fees.
Okay. Thank you for answering. Those were my 2 key questions.
Any other questions?
I'll ask some. I've got a long list. Going back to the Beach Boulevard site, this is the site here where we are, and the Surplus Land Act question. I just want to ask about the timing a little bit and just making sure that you're aware that there's a lot going on right here, right? The Sharp Park specific plan that rezones to up to 5 stories, that we have approved, but it still has to go through the Coastal Commission, and that is probably at least a couple years down the line since our local coastal land use plan has also not been approved and updated. And, we have had hotels, Sue DeGray told me since 1999 we've been trying to get a hotel developer to come here. So kind of knowing that there's uncertainty about what's allowed and density and also with the seawall and potential construction of that, I'm just wondering what the timing is and whether we'd really get the best price and the most interest, right now. And then that kind of leads me to, a lot of these and the sites that you're looking at are really long-term projects that will take a long time to, permit and build and actually bring in income. But it seems like there's a lot we could do with these sites now, maybe, paving and bringing in food trucks or, temporary uses of the space as we're looking at long-term goals that can help us meet some of our financial obligations, more quickly. And then I'll just, one more, just because I'm still thinking about the site, but also what I see missing is a discussion of workforce or affordable housing, and that is also affecting our ability to, for our businesses to fully operate and so forth. And, the consideration of whether this might be a good site for affordable housing, I don't know if it is or not, but what should we be doing to pursue low-income developers and because that takes time too. Right. So sorry, a lot of questions in that.
No, that's okay. I think those are good questions. I think What I appreciate is the notion of you have coastal commission jurisdiction matters for some sites, Quarry Site and others, the site in Pedro Point, as we mentioned earlier. So to the extent that those elongate that schedule, yes, that's just something we have to contend with. As to the timing, you would think you'd want to start that process and see if we can get interest level as early as possible, because I understand there was an RFP that kind of got put on hold around 2019 for the hotel opportunity site. And yes, during COVID, you've got to ask yourself, is that the right time to go try to find a hotel developer? I can tell you I'm in the process of working on at least 2 other hotel sites and opportunities, and there's really keen interest in essentially coastal regions. So I think timing to start the process makes some sense in our minds, knowing though that, yeah, you may get delayed as a result of some bigger hurdles, including Coastal Commission and Surplus Land Act for that matter. Now let's go to the housing question. Well, Surplus Land Act, that's what it's designed for. Mm-hmm. Is that site will need to be offered to an affordable housing developer. The city has to negotiate in good faith if there's interest within that first 60 days. The city is not obligated to sell a property or lease it for below market value. So the good faith negotiation period is 90 days. And that's a process. And that's a process that may have an end result that could have affordable housing related to the site. It may end up where the affordable housing negotiations don't end up with a meeting of the minds or value. Because if you just look at pure real estate values, you have a site that's sitting, on the coast, and it's got a tremendous value for a hospitality use. The environmental conditions and circumstances, whether it's sea level rise, are real issues to contend with. And that's why we say, hey, we've got to go through environmental studies and make sure that we end up in a site that has the proper resiliency. So there is a lot of work to do with these. And kind of in a sense, our work is just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg, if you will, for then these next steps to be taken potentially.
Before I do have a light, before I call on Councilmember Beer, before I call on Chair Berman. Hi. So Cosmont put on a really nice workshop at Cal City's conference in Long Beach regarding Surplus Land Act, and I was fortunate enough to attend that, so I feel like it's pretty well ingrained in my brain. Councilmember Bowles, would it be helpful if Ken expounded upon Surplus Land Act for a moment? And
I'm okay. I think I understand the process, but maybe for the public. Yeah.
Perfect. So if you wouldn't mind going into the Surplus Land Act for just a moment, brief history and briefly what process looks like for all city-owned land and what we have to go through if we're going to develop it at all. That would be very helpful.
Sure. I'll go through the history. The original Surplus Land Act, because the act has been around for years and years and years, required cities to offer property if it wanted to sell it or dispose of it to, let's say, school districts and parks and other public entities. But there was the ability, based on an economic development finding, that cities, it's really cities and all public entities. So it's cities, it's counties, it's districts, special districts. Any public entity was subject to the law. In 2019, AB 1486 was passed, which amended the Surplus Land Act, which then said that all those public entities have to offer property, whether it's for lease or sale. If it's for lease, for greater than 5 years, but for lease or for sale, to a list created by HCD and locally of affordable housing developers so that that opportunity was presented to them first. And that notice of availability, an NOA, gets issued to hundreds of recipients in the state. And there's a 60-day period that begins. So within that 60-day period, if an affordable housing developer does not express interest, then the city has the ability to essentially divest of that property, sell it or lease it at its leisure. And if the goal was, I'm trying to get private investment induced, it's a good hotel site, a good market rate housing site, it's a good retail site, what have you, the city or public entity can move forward accordingly. If during that 60-day period there's interest expressed, the obligation, and then there's a series of, well, what if there's 5 offers that come in? It's the most amount of affordability and it's at the lowest levels, et cetera. There's some tests as to who an agency, public agency, would have to then negotiate with in good faith. So after that 60-day period, if there is interest, there's an obligation for a 90-day good faith negotiation period. And during that 90-day period, it's like any other due diligence period. Everybody's trying to understand the merits of the site, the economics of the site, the density of the site, et cetera. Again, somewhere in the process, there's a declaration that it's surplus, which the city council usually does. There's an appraisal, typically, because public agencies should understand, what's my property worth? Is it worth $500,000 an acre? Is it worth $3 million an acre? And so when the market value is established, like any public entity who generally don't sell property for below market value, because there's other things that triggered as a result, they're not obligated. That entity within that public agency within that 90-day period is not obligated to sell at a below market value. Affordable housing developers really, at the end of the day, generally speaking, need subsidies to build affordable housing. And that's just the nature of that asset class. There is a strategy to try to get affordable housing into communities, of course, because it's needed. It's part of RENA. And it makes sense, whether it's at a workforce level or a low income level or a very low income level. There's ratios as well. So if a city gets through the 60-day period or the 90-day period and there isn't a deal that's struck, there's a 25%, 20 or 25% obligation to build affordable housing on that site. So there is an affordable housing requirement if 10 units or more are built. So if a city then, let's just say you take this site, Beach Boulevard, and they get to the end of the 90 days and it's a hotel and it's other visiting serving uses or retail, there's a covenant there, but there's no obligation to build affordable housing at that point. If you build 10 units, then there's that affordability restriction, below market rent. I think that summarizes it. There's more to it. It keeps all the lawyers and public city attorneys and stuff and us as advisors on our toes.
And if we don't get an affordable housing developer and we don't get a hotel that's interested, then does the process start back over years later, or you've still done that process?
No, the process is done in so much as at the end of that 90 days, what an entity wants to do or is required to do in a sense is settle up with HCD.
Okay.
Say, okay, HCD, this is what, and the communication during the process is important. And oftentimes cities and HCD and we are as advisors to cities, we're on the phone with HCD talking through the gray areas of things. What if a site could be split? Right. And half of it is suited or makes sense for hospitality use and the other half makes sense for residential use. So you're on the phone, you're having a conversation with HCD about how does that scenario work or make any sense? So there's communication. The last 30 days of this process I just mentioned, it wants to then make sure that there's an acknowledgement by HCD, you went through the process. And here's where we settled in. Therefore, you can move forward with your activities subject to the post-Surplus Land Act requirements. There's penalties involved as well. if cities do things that didn't comply with the Surplus Land Act. So there are penalties, a 30% of value penalty, et cetera.
So, Mr. Mayor, I just want to add a little bit as well to that summary of the Surplus Lands Act. The one thing I wanted to mention is that the City Council could designate land as surplus as part of the process, but it could also designate land as exempt surplus land. So there are a number of exemptions under the Surplus Lands Act, and so when there is a property that the city owns that we are identifying, either as surplus or exempt surplus, we would look at those as well. But it is a complex area of the law, and it is evolving, so it may not be the same 2 years from now as it is currently.
Thank you very much. Chair Berman.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Hira, for this analysis. I think the city and the community has been thirsty for something like this for some time, so thank you. My question involves hotel utilization, and going through the material, apologies if I missed it, I didn't see too much detail on the existing hotel utilization in the city. I know we have quite a few hotels, especially in concentrated areas like Sharp Park and Rockaway. I'm wondering if you could go into perhaps what analysis you did complete on existing hotel utilization and kind of the conclusion, which to me seemed implied that additional hotels would be just as, if not more, utilized.
Yeah, and I'm going to apologize because I don't have at my fingertips, I'm pretty sure it's in the report, an analysis that we would have used through the resource called Smith Travel Research, STR, which is now owned by CoStar. Anyways, it's a significant data source for hotel occupancy. So the metrics that we study are occupancy, ADR, which is average daily rate, and then as a result of that, there's the revenue that gets generated, and at a 12% TOT rate, which the city has, as I understand it, that's how we would then calculate, okay, this is a potential revenue source. When occupancy levels are, I'll use 75% as a baseline, greater than 75, let's just say, and based on X number of hotel rooms, you have a pretty strong hotel market. And you can look at your history as well of occupancy and how it's trended, because we've seen history of over 10-year periods where occupancy might have been declining for whatever reason, or it might have been increasing for whatever reason. And as it increases, that tells you that there's better market demand. We look at the ADR, average daily rate increase, which is what we all pay when we go check into a hotel, $300, $200, $100, and that's the ADR. We look at that trend because that obviously dictates revenue, and if there's greater demand than there is supply, that trend then tells us, hey, revenues are going, or ADR is going up. That could create an opportunity for a city. And then we certainly look at your actual revenues. And in doing all that, in our estimation, I don't have those numbers at my fingertips. In doing that, I think there's 300 some odd rooms, hotel rooms in the city. We look at it and say that the market, there's greater demand necessarily than there is supply. Now, it's also the type of hotel, because the value proposition here with the coastline and the beauty of Pacifica is that we know that there's a high value hotel proposition that has an opportunity to be here. So it's not just the number of rooms, but it's the type of hotel. You could think of it as how many stars it is, but there's other vernacular like upper upscale. These are relatively technical terms in the hotel industry. There's luxury, which is like your Ritz-Carltons, and that's not what we're suggesting. There's upper upscale, which is below that. There's upscale, which is we think is absolutely appropriate for the city of Pacifica. There's mid-scale, and there's select service, just to name a few of those. So we really believe that there's an upscale opportunity here in the city.
And is any of your indicators that you use, do they indicate seasonality?
Yes. We look at STR will help us. It's an amazing resource. It'll help us with which days of the week have what levels of occupancy, and you'll obviously oftentimes see the weekends in a leisure market. But then when you see weekdays in a leisure market that tells you there's something else driving that demand, as you can imagine. In more business-oriented markets, it's clearly a Monday through Thursday concept, and there's been a lot more challenges for business travel because of COVID. So not only that, but seasonality. So you mentioned, so you're going to see summer months have a lot of activity in places like Pacifica, and you're going to see it change a little bit, decline a little bit in some of the off-season periods of time. And so, yeah, that data is available, and it's pretty powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Beer.
Hi there. Thank you so much for this detailed report. I have a couple questions. Thank you for bringing up the Coastal Commission, because I think that's an issue for every single thing we ever try to do within the coastal zone, right? So we can't necessarily, anyway, thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it. When looking at the data collected from our community, I realized that it wasn't a very large sample. It never really is. And I know that I was at some of the in-person meetings, and I did see some of that reflected in your report, and I'm just wondering if it's possible for us at some point in time to see the data from specifically those in-person meetings, because they weren't a large number of folks, but they were really awesome conversations. So,
yeah, I agree with you. By the way, in that it was our opinion that I'd call them awesome in terms of the conversations. I thought that the first virtual meeting was very productive. I thought the in-person meeting was very productive, even though it wasn't a giant crowd. The comments and input, I don't know how there could have been tons of more people, because those voices were very well heard and their points were very well made. In my opinion, if we have any of that data or information, we're happy to share it with you.
that would be great, because I think that's actually really important. And then I'm wondering if you, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but if you looked at landscape and beautification, like trees, do they add any value? I don't know if you look at that or not.
Well, we didn't look at it specifically, but
Okay.
I mean, does the visual...
You talked about signs, right?
Signage is really important, but that doesn't mean that it's just about signage per se. It comes with sort of a landscape and facade treatment and an opportunity for improvement, which is both softscape in my mind and hardscape, as we call it. So it's signage and hardscape, which is facade treatments and landscaping, that can make a world of a difference in terms of... I was just in a meeting this morning with a big developer, and they talked about curb appeal. It's just a phrase they use, and that's important for the customer.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we do have our regular meeting at 7 o'clock. If there's no further questions, or perhaps...
I have one more, if you
One more?
don't mind.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can go back to slide 8. This is where you're looking at the potential generation, based on type of building, like restaurants and residential, et cetera. My question is about the residential number. Just knowing that our marina is requiring, a variety of housing for very low income, moderate market rate. What is used in your calculation? Is that all just market rate at that number of 85,000, or is that a blend?
No, it is considered market rate in terms of the cost. Now, when we say market rate, the cost of construction is just simply expensive. It's right per unit. And it isn't as if it's less expensive to build affordable housing.
No, I know. But if some of them are deed restricted, for example, the property tax revenue might be lower, right?
Correct.
And
So
that'll
the
affect the
property
bottom
tax
line.
revenue is assumed to be, in this case, in these examples, market rate.
Okay. And then, sorry. Now I've just lost my... So, and residential also costs more in city services, right? Parks, childcare, all of that. Is that factored in there at all?
No, because this is just meant to be, I'll call it a gross projection. There's no doubt that the net fiscal impact is something that one needs to look closely at, because you don't really want to promote a project or advance a project that has a net negative fiscal impact.
Right.
That's where community benefits come in. So there's a whole host of things that can be done in the collaboration with the private sector.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so any further questions we'll take after public comment? So I appreciate that. I believe the Comcast PCT channel is not available on cable, so any viewers will be viewing through webcast, and there's a delay. So I'll remind you now, if you're dialing in, it's 1-650-898-6965. Please press *5 to raise your hand. It's a conference ID 383-609-442#. And hopefully by the time we're done with the in-person comments, you'll have heard this and we'll be able to dial in and raise your hand, and we'll give an extra minute of breathing space to make sure. I have 2 cards. I wasn't sure if Pete Shoemaker wanted to speak on this item in addition to, okay. So Pete Shoemaker and then Cindy Abbott. Those are the 2 cards I have in my hand right now. If you do wish to speak on this subject, please fill out a card in the back and bring it up, and we will call on you.
Excuse me. Yeah, it's all yours.
And when you speak, please state your name in the beginning for the record.
Yes.
And then we'll begin your time.
Hi, my name is Pete Shoemaker. I live in Valamar. First off, I wanted to thank you for the report. It's really good, and the data is very useful. I'd like to make 3 quick points here. First off, this is a great report. A lot of people have seen these before, and there's some skepticism. Big reports had done it before. So I think I'd encourage you to keep the momentum going. Make some kind of a low-impact website where you could sort of have a scoreboard or a dashboard about what we were doing so people can point to it. So when that low-hanging fruit gets checked off, there's a sense of momentum that we're going. So people can say what they're doing. It doesn't have to be a big staff time, but I think it'd be a good idea. Second, thinking about housing, the quote said that housing is not a loss leader, housing can be a revenue generator, and it showed a picture of a sort of a mixed-use, high-density thing. From my research, and it's been pretty extensive on some new data, that kind of mixed-use thing is a revenue generator. But the kind of housing that people are trying to put up and rip off our hills and that single-family homes is not. It's a huge loss. And that's a big reason why Pacifica is so broke and so has such poor roads, because we are largely single-family homes, and that tax generation has not been able to barely keep up with the services it needs at the time. But when it comes to laying away future money for maintenance, not a chance, and that's why we're going broke. So please change that quote or something, because those people that are trying to push those housing developments can take that out of context and say, look, housing is a revenue generator, and they can really use it in the wrong way. So please specify that completely. And third, there's a lot of stuff here that needs help. You've got an overworked staff and a low budget. There's a lot of people here who want to help, myself included, and a lot of people I know. And we've been at odds at times, but we're not at odds on this at all. So we can help you. We can go, there's other cities and all over around and councils that are dealing with this. We're not the only ones dealing with this at all. So you have people in Petaluma, people in other places, Daly City, that are doing these mixed-use projects, dealing with the Surplus Land Act, and also putting the data together. We can go out and talk to those people, make a brief report, bring them in to talk to you. We can also do the same thing with our other council members and help you out. So please, let us do that. We don't want to take over your job, and everything has to go through the democratic process. But there's a lot of research that we can take off your shoulders and bring in experts to communicate. Happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Cindy Abbott, and I don't have any further cards after.
Ooh, tall people here. I'm Cindy Abbott, West Sharp Park. I appreciate this ongoing focus, and I appreciate and hope there'll be even more in the final report looking at neighborhood strategies. That's really the key to this, the way we alleviate traffic, the way that we stop the leakage outside of Pacifica is to provide each neighborhood with a full set of businesses that they need for walkable communities, because that's what we hear people want. That alleviates the comment in there that people can't leave their house. Well, if we had it in each neighborhood by remixing shopping centers that exist today, that could lessen some of the impact on Highway 1 traffic. There's an item in here that, and I'll have more comments. I wanted to mostly listen tonight, but there is a mention in here, number 15, that working with Caltrans to add coast highway signage is a medium-term priority. And we've been talking about this for decades. This needs to move up on the list. I just looked, it was in 2010 that Sue Vaterlos, when serving on the Economic Development Committee, put forward to Caltrans that Palmetto be a designated business route. That was done. That was actually approved. Took a really long time, but it was approved. But we still don't have a sign out there that says that on both Manor or Oceana. We also don't have, we have signs that I think aren't even necessarily Caltrans or that big of a deal for Caltrans, where if you look at from Crespi down to Lindemar, things are all stretched out. You have no idea what's back on Lindemar because you would have to be watching about 7 different signs there to see what's in places. So I think that's something that's low-hanging fruit that could move up on the thing. I know that it involves coordination with other agencies, but it was 7 years ago with a former economic development manager that a survey of all those signs was being done. So let's move that one up. One other comment, page 29, sea level rise and erosion is noted to impact Rockaway Beach and Manor. Those 2 topics impact all of Pacifica. They impact Sharp Park. They impact Pedro Point. And most importantly, they impact all of the people in Lindemar too. Maybe the only folks that don't are up in the Fairmont area, but that's really important to know. It's not going away. Sea level rise, erosion, it's happening today, and so we need to remain really mindful of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I concur with Cindy and Pete, and I appreciate the report. I appreciate all the council and the Planning Commission's questions and comments. Regarding the deep dive into economic, so we're talking about revenue coming into our city, both near and far. And one thing I urge you all, please, to consider all the assets that we already have that are bringing in money, but not to the point they could. That we need a coordination and a collaboration with these assets, which I'll mention in a minute, and the hotels and the businesses, especially restaurants and people that want to have events here, so that this kind of low-hanging fruit, but forever there, and residents of this community have done awesome work in maintaining and protecting, and that would be our natural assets and all the things that come with that, the ocean and all its recreation and its calming, the trails, the history. We have unique history. I'm a Navy brat, move every 2 years around. This city has so much history. And our culture, so for those of you who aren't aware, that would be art, music, theater, and things like that. So those kind of things are already blossoming, just plain blossoming. And a shout out to Cindy Abbott, who's right there with the Sanchez Art Center. You don't know the outreach that these citizen-run things, nonprofit, volunteer, pretty much, how many people and how far they reach, both online and in real-life traveling time. It's just super incredible. So I urge the consultants to do a really deep dive, and I hope you, council and planning, really be an advocate for this. Those treasures are there. They're always contributing. But I think there's a component that the city can fill that we haven't really felt, and that's your involvement to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Do we have any speakers from the audience who wish to speak? Do we have anybody on the line?
There's no one on the line.
Okay.
Mayor Big Stick, if I want to jump in, I think the speaker, Ms. Abbott, brought up a great point about Caltrans signage, and I did just want to say that Staff has been working with Caltrans in recent years on that, and it's an ongoing process. So in other words, I agree with the recommendation that it can be short-term and medium-term. It's a complicated process. We've most recently installed some hiking, trailhead-related signage along the highway, and there can be more improvements that occur. That's why it's identified.
So I'll close public comment. And thank you. I think that all the commenters made great points, and if they could be considered in the mix, I think that will be helpful.
Do you mind if I just piggyback on the Caltrans comment really quick?
Please do.
I know that we met with Caltrans recently, I think it's been 2 years, right, after OSPAC came out with their desire to meet with them about Fairway Park. And so it would be good to follow up on that, because signage was on it, is part of their 5-year plan, if I do recall correctly.
Yeah, that's correct. I do believe that last coordination meeting was in the October-November timeframe of 21. So a little over a year then. Yeah.
So deliberation, comment, questions? Go for it.
We heard a lot of questions tonight from council members and commissioners, and thank you, commissioners, for coming out 2 Mondays in a row. That had to do with the cost basis, really, and I realize this is an overview report, but I want to dig more deeply into some of the issues, like when Councilmember Bowles brought up that chart on page 8 and the average revenue that might be able to be generated from these properties. I need to understand, and this maybe is a staff thing as well, infrastructure costs that might also come up as a result of increasing the densities and the amount of building in these areas. I realize a lot of that is tied directly to the developer, but I need to understand, is there a multiplier? Is there a factor that we're putting into this? Because it seems like where we are right now with what we have is a lot of infrastructure costs and potential, and certainly many projects that we can't fund. And so I want to understand better how that relationship works with any proposed idea. Jumping back to the last comments about inventory and seasonality and all of that, I find it kind of funny, and maybe it's intentional, I don't know. The company referred to STR. Is that data that we're going to be receiving, or that is part of this next step analysis, or not? And okay, because I was looking at packet page 176, and it didn't have a lot of detail like that. But I am also very interested in occupancy. And I think it would, if it doesn't, we don't have a lot of detail there, I think it would bear fruit for us to obtain it, because it's certainly going to come up in regard to the STR conversation. I did have a question about the a statement in the executive summary. I just want clarification, make sure I'm understanding it right. On my packet, page 29, it says, in the second bullet point says, over the past decade, Pacifica has seen sales tax growth of 7.2%, despite a drop of 13% during the first year of the pandemic. And we realize that's a dip kind of situation. But sales tax growth rate of 7.2%. But then further down, the bullet point says, actual on-site sales in Pacifica business has seen little or no growth since 2012. So my takeaway from just those two bullets is that the sales tax revenue is coming to us from sales outside of Pacifica, such as online sales, I'm guessing. But I would like to have a deeper understanding of that as we hone in on the next phase of this report. Thank you.
Thank you. More feedback? Councilmember Vitalos.
I was wondering why they didn't include the Pedro Point Kelson property in any analysis. It says there's little to no area to increase in Pedro Point. Also, back to the 50 houses, I thought that was very small amount to be generated in sales tax, in property tax from 50 houses. The most inexpensive thing in Pacifica right now is $750. So they came up with $85,000, and even if you take that, it's a relatively small amount in the report compared to the actual. That's it for the moment.
Anyone else wish to give feedback, ask a question? Vice Chair Hauser.
Thank you, Mayor. I really appreciated that there was the addition of information about housing and the revenue that it generates. I think it's important to think about it. I do think as we look at it, understanding the net revenue is an important facet of this. And I'm not sure, I think suggesting where residential could go maybe makes sense, but putting a unit count to these sites, I'm just not sure if there's been enough land use study to go hand in hand with that. And I think it may cause confusion as we go through some of these other housing element processes. And we've just kind of redone all of our zoning designations. So that was the one thing that as I looked through it, it didn't maybe just didn't quite fit into the report, in my opinion.
I think that might have been the opinion of some of our public as well.
So I'm looking for any more feedback. If I don't have feedback, I'm wondering if staff has what they need in order to move forward.
I guess my question would be if there's any more specific comments on the attachment 3 or the other one, which lists them out by short-term, medium-term, and long-term, about the opportunities moving forward. Because those are really the short, medium, long-term actions that we will look to build into the long-term economic development strategy.
Can you direct me to a packet page? Because the way I'm looking at a printed package, there's a little gray box that shows the item E, and it cuts right where that attachment number is. So just to be clear. 193. Thank you.
I think it's pages 193 and 195.
Got it. And what is it you wanted us to give you, Kevin, on that?
We've already heard a couple comments, I believe, on some of these strategies, but if there were any additional ones, otherwise, there's no, unless the council or commissioners have comments they do want to make on these items, then we'll just move forward with these recommendations for the next iteration of the study.
Objections, additions?
Just as a reminder, I know Chair of the Commission, Hauser, mentioned some kind of more complicated analysis on the Beach Boulevard site and any public site regarding SLA. So I don't know if that could be added into the record and considered if any changes are needed or if another column needs to be added. I also, another reminder, I guess, Councilmember Bowles brought up a good point in that some of these properties, especially the vacant ones, may have temporary opportunities, which could bring some revenue, especially the sites that have long-term timing currently. in my opinion, I think it might be beneficial to look at some temporary activations in some of these sites or vacant parcels. And ideas were included in the staff report and the executive summary on like container shops or what are those, RV, Airstream pop-ups, food trucks. So I really liked that idea, and Councilmember Bowles brought up using temporary timing for short term.
And Councilmember Bowles.
Thank you, Lauren. I also wanted just to piggyback on something Cindy Abbott said about looking at neighborhoods. Vice Chair Hauser and I are well aware of the Manor District where we live, and we really see that as a key opportunity site because it's not just the shopping center that's there for the community, but it's also an important visual for people first coming into Pacifica. So not just signage, but trees, some kind of park, something that's more attractive visually, that sort of sets the stage, if you will, for Pacifica. And that particular shopping center was actually left out of one of the page 158 on the square footage. So I would like that to be fleshed out. But it is one that is growing more quickly than some of the others. I think because it's partly close to San Francisco. The parking lot is actually full at night because of restaurants and so forth now. And I think it's a place that there could be more long-term growth and redevelopment as well, and tying into the Manor Overcrossing project. So I see that as a strong opportunity site for the city. And I also just wanted to ask about commercial space, which you've kind of shown us that it doesn't really pay as much, but has there been any survey of our businesses that are here and that want to grow and what kind of space needs they might have? For example, I know Roslyn Bakery, again, within the Manor Shopping Center, is looking at ideally having a commercial bakery, which would be a much larger space too, and it would be great to be able to keep and encourage our businesses that are performing so well to grow and do well. Thank you.
And Councilmember Beer.
Just one thing about Valleymar. I know Valleymar was mentioned, but it was just the quarry that was talked about. But there's that small little, I live in Valleymar, so I'm biased, but there's that small little shopping center, and I didn't know if there's any opportunity there at all. So I just thought I would just add that into the record. Mm-hmm. And, an additional survey of our businesses could be done by others.
And there's the private property there adjacent to those little businesses, which again is private, but it is property.
Most of this is.
Right. Sorry, Mayor. It is a study session.
I absolutely favor organic dialogue. No problem. The time is now 7:02. Happy to take more questions or comments, but quickly, as we should be getting on to our regular session sooner than later. Going once, going twice. Staff, do you have what you need? In that case, the special study session is adjourned. I do want to thank Planning Commission for being here with us. It's so good to be with you. I want to thank Mr. Kanhira and Mr. Brian Mora. Thank you for being here with us. It's a group effort, a community effort, and thank you, thank you, thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute recess.